about them and open the topic, and then we'll have about 40-45 minutes of our speakers telling us more about the topic, and then we can open it for question and answers. So in this larger context of environmental conservation, the criticism of beef consumption has come up. And the climate change bringing up attention to more plant-based diets. India has kind of like tried to position itself as a shining example of a vegetarian society. So, this talk talks about how in Western image, Indian vegetarianism is a noble lifestyle, which is driven by progressive ethics of nonviolence and animal welfare. However, our authors do not agree to this viewpoint, and they show that instead the reverse is true, that Indian vegetarianism is regressive, and it's based on conservative ideas about society. The large-scale analysis of data shows that vegetarians in India are not interested in animal welfare. They discriminate on the basis of dietary preferences and are invested in promoting Brahmanism. So the authors also use in-depth interviews and analysis of other information to show how the myth of this vegetarianism in India is established and how it's maintained through this coercive mechanisms. So it's very interesting. Stay tuned. We'll have a lot of lively conversation afterwards as well. So Abhilasha Srivastava, she's assistant professor of economics at California State University, San Bernardino, US, and is interested in labor, caste, race, and capitalism. She has published work on various issues like time use, gender, household bargaining, vegetarianism, and manual scavenging. And Aseem Hasnain is an assistant professor of sociology at Bridgewater State University, Massachusetts, and is interested in caste, capitalism, collective identity, social movements, globalization, and environment. And he has published works on tribal social movements in India, comparative human rights, conflict in Middle East, and politics of vegetarianism. So join us in welcoming this power couple to our discussion today.
All right. Hello everyone, and Jai Bhim. And this power couple is sort of powerless because we have two very young kids. So sometimes their power will make us go out from this presentation in and out alternatively. We will do that if they need us quickly, but we'll be back. So to begin with, thanks to the Boston Study Group for this opportunity to share our work with this diverse audience. And we will be talking about the Indian version of vegetarianism today and its politics. As full disclosure, I am an omnivore, and Abhilasha, the co-author, is a vegetarian. So we have had these discussions in different ways in our household for a long, long time. So we are also very sort of closely related to the whole debate and discussion on vegetarianism and vegetarian food preferences. We will be using the term omnivore today for non-vegetarian because as very many authors have argued that non-vegetarian itself is a negative term, an ideological term. So when you hear omnivore, just think non-vegetarian. I hope we will get some questions.
Pause you for a minute. We are not able to see your video. Is there something with that? We can continue with this though. Yeah, now it's good. All good.
Okay. All right. So I hope that we will get some questions today and some disagreements so that we can sort of take it back to our work and change it. So let's begin this.
Okay. Thank you everyone for being here, and we are very excited to be presenting this work here today. And as Aseem said, that this paper started with our own conversation about vegetarianism, but the trigger as Jesse mentioned, was really the conflation between Indian vegetarianism and the version of vegetarianism that is followed in US and Europe. So there is a emerging global opinion that vegetarianism is a good thing, and for multiple reasons, for health reasons, for animal welfare, and most recently for climate change. So a recent released speech of 2019 Lancet report on climate change mentions India as a shining example of vegetarianism, and the world can emulate that example. However, this apolitical position assumes that most of the Indians are vegetarians, first of all, and then associates it with other things that are considered, as Indian, like yoga, spiritualism, and the general ethics of non-violence. So we find that deeply problematic, and first, because India is not a vegetarian society, only some Indians are vegetarians. Second, Indian vegetarianism is not progressive, rather it is conservative because it conserves families' food habits. So people become vegetarians mostly because they are socialized into it. They don't choose it. They are forced into it. So this contrasts with the West, where in general what happens is people rebel from their family, fight against their socialization, and become vegetarians or vegans because they learn about the problems associated with the industrial meat production and brutal meat industry. So, and thirdly, Indian vegetarianism is not just spiritual, as it is often spoused as, but or about health, but it is a deeply political practice. We know both from experience and recent research that omnivores face a lot of discrimination, for example, in finding housing. And in the last few years, we have also seen an increasing spate of violence around meat and cattle, which is usually aimed at Dalits and Muslims who have been framed as animal killers by perpetrators who ironically claim that they love animals so much that they can kill humans for it. So, thus, Indian vegetarianism diverges from the ethical motivations of Western vegetarianism. So, then, an important question that arose for us was, what are the conditions that makes this discourse of vegetarianism and its linkages with non-violence so persistent? And as we began thinking about this project formally, we started looking for existing research and literature, and found that most of this scholarship within different discipline places vegetarianism in a political box with dealing with food preferences, right? So food preferences can be based on many things, on geography, economy, habits, social identity, culture, among others. But the political economic analysis of food that looks at the politics of food was very scattered and far between. So that is what we were interested in, and specifically the politics of food and understanding the role of ideology and its connection with social hierarchy of caste in shaping dietary choices, more specifically connection between Brahmanism and vegetarianism. So, well, we started looking for literature, and we want to acknowledge that there is a emergent literature in India which talks about the politics of vegetarianism, and we see our research contributing to that literature. But before moving on, we also want to emphasize that there is actually a lot of literature which studies after studies which emphasize that Indians, only a minority of Indians are vegetarians, right? So we found a study going back to 1974, which estimated vegetarians to be around 35%. And then another government source from 2014 estimates them to be around 12 to 29%, which is a huge range. Uh, a very detailed study in 2018 by Natarajan and Jacob, they used multiple data sets to put the vegetarianism around 20%, which they give us with a caveat that even this might be an overestimation. And we kind of agree. So in summary, India is not a vegetarian country, but its vegetarian image is carefully cultivated, both socially but also in Western academic circles as well. right? So we wanted to explore why that is the case, and we found some answers trying to look at literature around ideology. So I go very briefly into that discussion for a bit. So we draw on Althusser's theorization of ideology. Althusser was a neo-Marxist, and he was trying to expand the idea of social reproduction in capitalist society. So to expand this idea of social reproduction is essentially the way Marx theorizes it as how the capitalist system keeps on reproducing itself, which requires two things. It requires reproduction of things, but it also requires reproduction of people, because people are essentially the labor power in a capitalist society. So this continuous reproduction means that the system needs to reproduce the skills of the labor power, but also reproduce the condition which makes this labor power submissive to the rules of the social order. So how do you achieve that submission? So Althusser argues that this submission is possible only through ideology, right? And which he says is an imaginary relationship between individuals and their actual conditions of existence. But it is very important that everyone agrees to those imaginary relationship to be invested in that system. So, and Althusser goes on to describe two types of mechanisms that are used in capitalist society to reduce the relations of reproduction. One is the ideological state apparatus, and other is the repressive state apparatus. And we will return to these mechanisms later when we talk about our findings. But other scholars have kind of built on this conception of ideology and said that ideology is one of the central ingredients of identity, because identities are constructed through difference with others. So these differences are emphasized through boundary making processes that distinguishes a desirable self from undesirable other. And we were trying to apply this understanding of ideology and identity to caste in India and Brahmanism. And then we drew upon Dr. Ambedkar's theory of caste to kind of club these together. So he describes caste as a system created by superimposing jati endogamy or subcaste endogamy over gotra or clan endogamy, exogamy, excuse me, in order to establish and perpetuate a system of graded inequality. So essentially, he's saying that this does not only creates a division of labor, but also this is a system of creating a division of laborers, right? So it's how, and this division is then.
Oh.
Oh,
Yeah.
so okay. So how much have everyone missed?
Just like a minute. I think there was some in between.
Glitch. Okay, yeah. So yeah, as I was saying, so we kind of borrowed from Dr. Ambedkar's theory of caste, which he describes as a system of not only division of labor, but division of laborers, right? So, and this division is then used to assign social, economic, and political status to people based on their position in caste hierarchy. And Brahmanism is a framework through which these extractive social relations and their attendant inequalities are both justified and made invisible. And one of the prominent ideological tools that Brahmanism deploys in this process is the idea of pollution and purity. So we looked at that and found that the sum of the pathways through which this pollution and purity is embedded in everyday practices includes defining and reinforcing acceptable and unacceptable food, keeping outgroup out of the kitchen, avoiding interdining with outgroups, especially omnivores, refusing to marry with omnivore families, and the dietary, segregation of shared spaces such as college cafeterias, dining halls, office lunchrooms, and restaurants. So essentially, what this shows us that within Brahmanism, what one eats is not an innocuous, everyday mundane act anymore, but it is a political act which reproduces social relations of caste and reinforces boundaries between in-group and out-group. So, so we kind of use this understanding of ideology and its connection with the caste to show that vegetarianism in India is an ideological tool used by the people invested in Brahmanism to establish yeah. So we kind of have this framework, but
sorry, Abhilasha, so there've been some incidences in the past where the Zoom bombing happened. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to be making sure that people who are entering into the waiting room are like assigned with a name. But in case something like this happens, just pause for a second, we'll mute, take the person out, and then we can continue. Sorry, it has been an issue like which has been occurring.
okay, okay. So yeah, so as I was saying that, so we use this framework to kind of show that vegetarianism in India is an ideological tool for Brahmanism. And we wanted to test this using some kind of data. So, and see if vegetarian households, so one way to, test this is to see if vegetarian households are indeed castists, right? So, and if they support the features of Brahmanism that we kind of talked about, those pathways through which pollution and purity is practiced, So, and so we did that, and we also kind of did the interview to show the connection, how this is established. So I'm going to first talk about our data for a bit, and then Aseem will talk about the interview stuff. So we used 2011-12 wave of a nationally representative survey called IHDS data, which has a lot of questions about dietary preferences, but also questions about caste endogamy, clan exogamy, purity and pollution, widow remarriage, etc. So we before we jump onto these regression findings, let me quickly show you. So I want to share my screen. Let me see, to show you the graphs. Does it share? Oh.
You should be able to share, Blasha, your co-host.
Okay.
So at the very bottom, the green thing. So if you do screen share.
Yeah, I know.
Why don't you minimize this and then?
No, let me just yeah.
This and now press.
No, there is no way I can press both. I apologize
Okay,
for.
we'll be able to just see you on the. We'll be able to see your screen. I think it comes up as a separate like window for you. So even if it doesn't, no worries. We can see the screen. I think you were able to do that.
Let me see if we can actually show this. So we are on an iPad now, and we are not.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Can you see this now?
We can just see Abhilasha's name there.
No.
Can you see this graph that we have on our screen? Right?
No, we're not able to see it.
Okay, wait. Let's see. So we have. What is this?
No, this is.
You can also forward me, like you can email me.
Oh, yes.
If that
okay.
works.
Yeah.
Let me do that.
Yeah, because your video was working fine. You can just email me and I can show that when you want.
Okay. Yeah. So
maybe you can keep talking while
so this so the first graph I was about to show you kind of shows you the population percentage by caste and then vegetarian household within each caste groups. And what I was trying to show you was that essentially Brahmins are minority, 5%, of all the population, but within vegetarians, they constitute around 66.25%.
So, Jaspreet, if you received the email, you have a PowerPoint.
Yeah. In the meantime, Aseem, you might want to switch on your video.
Yeah.
Just now.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you have the PowerPoint in your email box, you can go to slide number 12 that we are talking about right now.
Okay, give me 1 second. Yeah, you can continue. Now we can see you. If you want to talk about it, I can quickly go to 12, you said?
Slide 12 onwards. So we can go to 12 and you can, yeah.
Let me do screen share.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Absolutely.
This one.
Go ahead.
Right. So yeah, so on the left graph we have the population percentages, and on the right graph we have vegetarian households by caste. So as I was saying, that you can see that Brahmins constitute around 4.9% of all the population, and their share among vegetarians is around 66.28%. So essentially, they are followed by OBCs and forward castes. So this is not to say that Brahmins from all.
So I think one point that we really were very interested in was that you can see that vegetarianism is followed by a very small minority, 4.9% people, but it is so powerful, so influential that the entire nation is cultivated in the image of this small minority. Very much like the Syrian case, where the small Alawite minority leads all ideas and images of the country. So that is, I think, the most important part here.
Yeah, and this is not to say that Brahmins from all regions are predominantly vegetarians, but overall, Savarna constitute the majority of vegetarians. That's what we want to say with this image. Jessie, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Okay, so so now we are looking at our statistical analysis, and these maps give a snapshot of our findings. So the left map shows the distribution of vegetarian household in different regions, that what percentage of households are vegetarian in that particular region. And the right hand shows the households that practice untouchability. Percentage of households that practice untouchability in those particular regions. So in both maps, the green is the warning sign, so to say. So green on the left graph shows vegetarianism, and green on the right graph shows untouchability. That means that as we move from green to yellow to red, we will see less vegetarian household and lesser practice of untouchability in the region. So notice that almost there is a perfect overlap between vegetarianism and untouchability. And couple of things to note here is that the most of the vegetarians and untouchability practicing regions are from the cow belt, so-called cow belt, and as well as the regions where the RSS and its affiliates have had historic influence. So this is something to note, but we see that vegetarianism does correlate strongly with the preference, with the practice of untouchability. Okay, can you go to the next graph, please, Jessie? So I'm going to go quickly over these graphs. The next graph is the same thing, but now we are looking at the practice of purity and pollution within the kitchen. And again, there is a lot of overlap between vegetarianism and the people who practice pollution and purity within the household. But in this graph, we can also see some exceptions like Orissa and Chhattisgarh, and we can talk about it later. Next graph. And similarly, we see that vegetarian households are also least likely to go into intercaste marriages. Although the intercaste marriages have low rates across the country, and Aseem is going to talk a little bit more about that. And we can talk about it during question and answer. And the next two graphs all kind of also show the same thing. Next graph, please, Jessie. Yeah, so next graph shows the overlap between vegetarian households and opposition to widow remarriage, and we see a lot of correlation between these two graphs and households. And similarly, we have just one last graph about the marriage within your natal village, which essentially is about jati endogamy. So we see a lot of overlaps as well. So based on this, so now we are done, Jesse. So based on this, we kind of also ran some regression models, and I'm not going to show you any data or as such, but that kind of confirms that vegetarian households are significantly more likely to have casteist behavior that supports Brahmanism. One nuance to add to that analysis is the fact that we also ran regression within vegetarians across caste lines. So we found that Brahmins were significantly more casteist than forward caste than OBCs. And we also found that SC and ST households are not casteist except for their adherence to caste endogamy. So this is something that we can discuss later in question and answer. So this is the first part of our analysis, and Aseem will now talk about the next part, which is the interview data.
Right. So before I begin, Jaspreet, can you quickly tell us how many more minutes can we use? So I will just reorient how much detail I will get into. We started late, and so I'm not sure how much.
No worries. No, go ahead, Aseem. We can take the time that you need. No worries.
All right. So I'll be, I was going through the paper that we wrote, and I just brought out a lot of juicy stuff from interviews and other things. So our statistical analysis shows that there is a huge correlation between households that are vegetarian and households who practice norms of caste behavior. So everything we know from this data shows this strong correlation, right? However, statistics have limitations. They don't really tell us how vegetarianism becomes a tool for Brahmanism or a tool for caste-based norms. So to understand that process, what we did was we reviewed a variety of sources. We started reading news around vegetarianism. We read reports. We read data on crime. We went through a lot of websites, propaganda material. We reviewed a lot of movies and TV series. And we also interviewed 14 people, in-depth interviews we conducted with them. And these were a combination of vegetarian and omnivorous people from various geographic and caste backgrounds in India. So all this evidence basically helped us understand how vegetarianism is established, reproduced, and enforced, both in the private sphere and in the public sphere. So what we did was, as Abhilasha mentioned, the whole Althusserian theory about ideology, we used that to interpret our materials, the website materials and the reports and news, as well as our interviews. So we know that Althusser has theorized how elitist or powerful social orders need to be reproduced. They need to be reproduced in a way that shapes everyone who's part of the system, both the oppressor and the oppressed. And unless and until we reproduce people, we cannot reproduce the system. So reproduction is very, very important here. And Althusser presents two different types of mechanisms for this purpose. He says that reproduction of the system takes place through two mechanisms. One of them is called an ideological mechanism or apparatus, and the other is a repressive mechanism or apparatus. So the ideological mechanisms are actually independent institutions in the private sphere, and they can be things such as social norms, family, schools, religion, morality, culture, media, all those things within which people get socialized, people learn to become part of society. And these ideological mechanisms basically reproduce the social order through ideological training. They train you mentally through ideas. And then the other mechanism is the repressive state apparatuses. And they are more centralized institutions, they are more formal institutions, and they include things such as the law, rules, courts, the police system, as well as the prison system. They also include state-sponsored violence. This can be both legitimate violence and illegitimate violence. So these repressive mechanisms, they basically reproduce the system using the force and coercion of violent tactics. So both of them work together, ideological and repressive. They work together, sometimes even simultaneously. Now, as we move towards our interviews, I wanted to quickly mention that the family is usually understood as the most important agent of socialization. All our primary socialization takes place there, about everything in life, including food. And the family is also a very important unit of caste society because it models a heteronormative sexual union, which is usually arranged. In India, 95% families are arranged marriage families. And they also show caste endogamy. So, I mean, the family is very, very important to our caste-based society. And now patriarchy ensures in India that women are more burdened by caste norms, and they are also more in the role of policing food and cooking and what is eaten inside the household, right? So one of our respondents shared that and this is a pretty grown-up person, an adult person like us, and he shared that he can't stand even now the smell or the taste of garlic. And he said that this is because his grandmother and his mother never used garlic or onion in their kitchen. So they were they were averted to that smell and texture. They never used it. He can't stand it. He can't do it even now. So that's the power of socialization in the family. And that plays a big role in caste reproduction. Outside the family, the immediate neighborhood becomes key to socialization. And a lot of our respondents mentioned, especially women, that when they were growing up, when they were younger, I mean, their mobility was limited, extremely limited to just a few of their neighbors' homes. They could go there and play and come back and sometimes even eat a snack. And in most cases, these neighbors had very similar dietary habits. They were very close, they were very comparable in dietary as well as caste status. One of our respondents told us that meat never even entered her imagination while she was growing up because it was never visible. She had never seen it or heard about it. And she said that no one who visited us and no one whom we visited us ate meat. It was out of the question. It did not exist for us. So that was a very powerful thing. And this is actually not a coincidence. I mean, even though we might think this is just coincidental, we know that rural and semi-urban housing is extremely caste segregated. Even in urban areas, people live in enclaves where the distribution of caste is not very good. I mean, other caste people and other IUs in courts are very few and far in between Muslims and other caste people. It's usually the Savarna who live in areas. Only government-built colonies actually have a little bit better distribution because they have a lottery system. So insulating oneself from the other, again the quote others, is actually a very good tactic for both reproducing caste and reinforcing your food habits. The less you mix up, the less you will learn about other types of foods, right? Schools also function as very important ideological spaces. And several respondents shared their traumatic memories of taking a non-vegetarian or an omnitarian diet in their lunchbox and getting shunned by their friends or getting insulted by their friends. And while schools do not have formal rules about what you can bring in a lunchbox, I mean, the unsaid norm is that your lunchbox should be very safe, clean, sanitized, vegetarian food, not really eggs and meat, in most cases. Not always though, right? So another respondent shared his aversion to the sight and sound of bones, chicken bones cracking, or meat fibers being pulled while people consume them. And that sight was like sort of really, really abhorrent to this person, which I mean, I can relate with. There is also a very strong association between meat eating and character of a person. And one of our respondents shared that our scriptures are very, very clear that people who eat meat are actually Durjan people. They are Durjan, which means demonic. They are not regular people, normal people, but very bad people eat meat. So you will see that across these few examples of what we learned in the family, there is a common notion of abjection or ghin or ghrina, which marks the pure from the impure, the clean from the dirty, and the good from the bad. And we see this as a very clear reflection of caste sensibilities as they operate through smell and taste and sight and the sound of food, as well as about moral character of people coming from different caste groups. Now, the most interesting part in our interviews was that these ideological training mechanisms do not just affect people who are vegetarians. They also affect people who eat meat. So even omnitarians believe in vegetarianism to a large degree. And uh, I'm going to share some behavioral patterns that our omnitarian respondents shared with us. So one of them was about concealing meat consumption. And we learned that a lot of caste groups, especially Brahmins in North and Central India, do not usually openly eat meat, even if they like it. I mean, they will eat it, but they will hide it from others in their community. And sometimes even marriage proposals are rejected because one of the parties is known to be a meat-eating family. And so the meat part is concealed. They don't openly do it. And these families have a great amount of aversion towards anything that resembles meat. Two very interesting examples I want to share here. So one of our respondents, a pretty senior Brahmin person from North and Central India, he has lived in both areas, told us that when he was growing up, in his home, tomatoes were not used because tomatoes had a red juice coming out when they were cut, and that resembled blood. It is only in the last few decades that his family started using tomatoes. And the other more interesting example he shared was that in his household, in his parental household, that is about 80, 90 years ago from now, the word cut was not used for vegetables. When you were preparing vegetables, you were supposed to apportion them. You could never use the word cut because cutting was for meat. Only meat could be cut. Vegetables had to be apportioned, divided in small pieces. So that is the kind of semantic or linguistic particularity that people hold in such conservative families about how food is even described using language, right? So the second pattern that we saw among omnitarian respondents is guilt. So a lot of people eat meat from upper caste groups or OBC caste groups, but they're very guilty about it. And this guilt can be seen in, say, I will not eat meat on a Tuesday or on a Thursday or on a Saturday, based on which Devi or Devta you worship. And so you will not eat during that. Or some people will not eat meat during Sawan in the entire 14 days. And at the end of Sawan, they will eat like a bucket full of meat to celebrate their abstinence. But this abstinence shows that in their minds, meat is something that should be avoided, at least during ritually important periods, right? So in their mind, even though they eat meat, meat is not a good thing. It's sort of a morally inferior thing, a sinful thing that they should avoid, ideally speaking. So this part was the most critical, and we are calling these type of omnitarian people omnivorous vegetarianists. So they are ideologically vegetarian, but they eat meat. And I think this is central to our paper, that this is how powerful the ideology of vegetarianism is, that you become non-vegetarian, but you still believe in vegetarianism. So we also learned from some respondents about meat eating as a phase of the life cycle. So in some communities, it is okay to eat meat while you are growing up, especially for men. So one of our respondents told us that in their community, in their village, men and boys were permitted to eat meat. They could, as far as it was chicken or goat or sometimes occasionally game meat, they could eat it, but they were expected to leave it later. And the point was that boys need to eat meat for strength. And they were expected to leave eating meat, become vegetarian after they have their own children. So that really brings out this uh, um, belief that meat contributes towards sexual or reproductive functions or skills or attributes. This also relates to how women, even in meat-eating homes, are prohibited from eating either meats or anything that is considered tamasic. And the idea is that, if they eat this tamasic food, they are more likely to express themselves sexually. And the chances of them having sexual relations with an unapproved person from an undesirable group may increase and may break the taboo of endogamy and caste mixing and all this. So we have heard about these stories. Most of you would have heard these stories that women should not eat tamasic food in particular. We also found that a lot of meat-eating omnitarians of upper caste have anxieties about what type of meat they can eat. And they learned this from their family primarily. One of our respondents helped us create a very clear map of who eats what. And so it was Brahmins are vegetarians, scheduled castes eat pork, and Muslims eat buffalo. So this is very, very clear in the minds of a lot of people that this group eats this. If you eat this, you belong to that group, morally, at least speaking, right? I mean, people eat a lot of things, but I mean, this is the kind of simple narrative that a lot of people still hold. So this particular respondent also helped us understand a very important thing. And he shared that once he actually ended up hanging out with some of his friends who were not from his caste group. They were from a group which was perceived to be lower. And he ended up eating some mollusks and snails with them. They were playing and they ate it by the side of the pond. And when he came back home, he told his parents, and the parents gave him a very severe dressing down on two counts. One, that he ate the wrong kind of meat, and two, as a corollary, that he was hanging out with the wrong type of people. So wrong type of people eat the wrong type of meat, and right type of people eat the right type of food, right? And eventually we also found that both Dr. Ambedkar and other scholars in the West have also created this categorization of food, a pyramid of food, a hierarchy of food, which has sattvic food at the top. As you move down, you see white meats like chicken and fish. You come down, you see goat and lamb and the red meats. And as you descend, you see pork at the very bottom, and carrion or dead cattle at the very bottom of the pyramid. And this is basically nothing but a clear mimicking of the graded inequality of food, of caste, that Dr. Ambedkar has proposed. So I mean, that graded inequality also works in parallel with food. So I mean, caste and food are pretty, I mean, thick together. They're very close to each other in how they are presented. All right. I think I'm taking too much time. Let me start moving a little faster here. I'll just quickly summarize this part. So I mean, these examples basically show us that all our primary and secondary socialization that takes place in the family, in the school, is basically nothing but a training into the rules of caste. And that is the point that we are trying to take out here. When you get trained about food, you are basically getting trained about caste rules. So you learn this and you apply it there. They don't tell you that this is a caste rule. They tell you it's a food rule, but eventually it's a caste rule. So it's a kind of a very deceptive and very efficient way of including people or inducting people into the caste system. Now, let me share some evidence about how ideological apparatuses or mechanisms operate in the public sphere. Jaspreet, how are we doing on time? Good. Okay. All right. So over the last few, I'm going to share now evidence from things that we have been reviewing, not necessarily from our interviews, but we have been seeing this in advertisements and television, cinema, news, all these places, magazines. So over the last few decades, restaurants have come in a big way in India, both in urban areas as well as in semi-urban areas. I mean, you can go to a small town now and still see a McDonald's there. So it's a big thing. It's a big deepening of the markets. And in that way, restaurants have increasingly broken the monopoly of the home as a site for practicing eating relations, right? So restaurants are now the new place where you practice and cultivate relations of eating. And so the markets have, at least theoretically speaking, dented the whole notion of commensality, the rules of eating. However, even these agents of the market have not been able to work against caste norms. Instead, they reproduce and reinforce these caste norms. So all of us must be aware of the idea of pure veg restaurants. I mean, each city and town has these pure veg restaurants. We know what they mean, right? They mean that they have nothing impure there. Everything is pure, and you will protect your caste if you eat here. Mixed restaurants also ensure that cooking stations are kept separate. Even MNC restaurants like KFC, McDonald's, and Burger King have introduced vegetarian options in India. They also openly advertise that they have separate cooking stations. So even if you are modern enough to eat out of your home and take the risk of getting polluted, you know that this company is going to protect your purity, right? So while we understand that all these restaurants do this because they want to maximize their profit, we also see that in effect, they are basically reinforcing and reproducing the same notions of purity and pollution. They are reproducing it. So it's getting not dented at all. So capitalism or the market is not at all denting caste in India. It's reinforcing it. It goes hand in hand. Mass media has been a major and invisible normalizer of vegetarian myth in India. And we have been carefully sorting out popular movies and TV shows. What really helps is that both of us watch a lot of TV. I mean, even with all our academic work and our kids, I think on an average, we watch like maybe 2 hours of TV every day or more sometimes, maybe one. Okay. So that helped. And what we saw was that meat is almost absent from the mass media. You almost never see meat apart from culinary shows. In regular TV programs or movies, you see it very rarely. And what you see is only white meat. The only exception, recent exception, is the series called Mirzapur. Some of you might have seen it. It's about this violent mafia family in a eastern UP town. And even though the villain in this series is a Brahmin, he's a Durjan, and he's shown to relish goat meat. So mutton is like a very regular feature in the house of this mafia don. But apart from this example, we almost never see mutton or beef or buffalo meat or any other meat in TV and cinema, right? So culinary shows are exceptional. They include meat because you learn to cook them. And however, we actually found that MasterChef India actually had a vegetarian season. And that is very surprising because MasterChef is a foreign brand, and they are usually oriented towards a very international type of cuisine and very international types of ingredients. So they try to bring things together from all across the world. Now, the vegetarian season for MasterChef was broadcast in a very special year. The year was 2014. And it's a special year for India, as all of us know. And the best part is that this season was sponsored by none other than the Adani business group. So the ideological mechanisms cannot really be more clearer than this if you start looking at things, right? Now, another arena where this ideological apparatus or mechanism works in the public sphere is through the work of various gurus, babas, and swamis. And post-liberalization, these spiritual businessmen have become much more influential. They use technology to reach out to their audience in an ever-expanding way. And what we found from a very basic content analysis of some of their websites was that vegetarianism is a very, very prominent feature of their work, even though the way in which they talk about vegetarianism is very different. It depends on the clients that they have. So, for example, Jai Gurudev, who is a Baba popular among rural and semi-urban people in UP and Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, talks about vegetarianism in a very authoritarian way. He says, don't eat it, you can't eat it, you will go to hell or something like that. But people like Sri Ravi Shankar and Sadhguru, I mean, they talk about vegetarianism as a in a very liberal kind of a model. That you have to, let your body think and feel. Your body will eventually tell you that you want to eat vegetarian food. So they also support it, but in a very sophisticated way that will appeal to a person who has been educated in an English medium school or who lives abroad, an NRI person. So they sort of vary there. So these are some of the examples of how the ideological mechanisms operate in the public sphere. Let us now move to the next part, the second part of our interviews or of our evidence that emphasize how the repressive mechanisms of Althusser's concept also work to produce or reproduce vegetarianism. And just to remind you that these are laws and regulations and police and violence, right? So we begin with the 48th article in the Indian Constitution and this is an article of state policy, which says that the state must make programs to protect cows, calves, and other milch animals. Now we are pretty, everyone will be agreeable to the fact that this would have been sneaked into the constitution by a conservative interest group, because India is a secular country, so there is no point in including protection of cows even back in 47. So this is part of the constitution nevertheless, and we see that this article has been used by a lot of state governments, especially BJP ruled state governments, to create local laws prohibiting the consumption of or the slaughter of or the trade of cattle, cows, as well as other things, other animals. So apart from these cow-centric laws, many towns and cities of religious importance to Hinduism in India or Jainism in India have been made meat and egg free over the last few years. And you may have read news about it. Ujjain is one such example. And there are other examples like, I think, a few cities in Maharashtra near Nasik, they become vegetarian for a particular period. A lot of neighborhoods in Bombay even have been turned into vegetarian neighborhoods during particular festivals by vigilante groups, which get tacit support from the local police. So they keep using laws as well as informal rules to make spaces vegetarian on and off everywhere. And they use both rules, formal rules, as well as unsaid rules and the police to ensure this. So this is part of the repressive mechanism. In 2018, the Central Ministry of Environment ordered a blanket ban on the slaughter of cattle, which was later revoked after nationwide protests and legal wrangling. But this again shows how rules can be used to, repress people and make them reproduce a particular kind of food habit. The RSA, or the repressive mechanisms, also operate in colleges and universities. Most of these institutions, both public and private, serve either only vegetarian food or mostly vegetarian food, with meat being served only sporadically on special occasions. And in recent years, especially after 2014, a lot of such institutions have tried to purge meat from their menu. We have been reading a lot of news items about this. In some cases, meat consuming students are made to sit in a separate area so that their consumption of meat does not pollute other people, right? And the universities or colleges or mess administration create very clear rules around it. They will make a poster and paste it somewhere, so they use that method. The Minister of Education of the BJP-led government recently also proposed to make government-funded educational institutions vegetarian a couple of years ago, which did not really get realized because a lot of Bahujan students fought this back, and they argued that this food fascism will not be allowed. So a lot of resistance has been also been witnessed. It's not a one-sided game, despite all this happening. So we also see vegetarian ideology playing out in public daycare centers, anganwadis, and primary schools, where the government funds breakfast and midday meals, right? So, I mean, you must have read news items that we have seen that BJP governed states are notorious for opposing the inclusion of eggs in the midday meal scheme or in the Anganwadi. And our Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh recently, 2 years ago, Shivraj Singh Chauhan, said that I will allow the inclusion of eggs in Anganwadi is only over my dead body. So you have to basically kill me to be able to serve. And the Anganwadis which were being discussed were actually in tribal areas, in areas where people eat meat and eggs as their regular food. So it's not about them, it's about his role as a powerful person, as a upwardly mobile, vegetarian, a Brahmanist who wants to impose this on others using rules, right? Another BJP MLA in Madhya Pradesh recently said that we should not serve meat or eggs because children start with eating eggs and they will eventually become cannibals. If they start with eggs, they will eventually start eating people later when they grow up. So these are some of the examples of these repressive, formal repressive mechanisms. And why do we see that these repressive mechanisms need legislation and legal enforcement? There are also other ways in which these repressive mechanisms can be used and have been used to enforce vegetarianism in India. These especially include vigilante violence. The RSS and its affiliates, both formal and informal, such as the Bajrang Dal, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, etc., have been heavily involved in violent campaigns to oppose not only cow slaughter, but all types of trade and consumption connected with the cattle industry. And we have seen a lot of these news. So we have witnessed several instances of mob lynching of individuals, mostly Muslim and Dalit men, over the last few decades. And this has been one of the ways in which this vigilante violence, supported by the state, also plays a big role. And we also see that this kind of violence is very openly supported by elected representatives of the state, especially of the BJP, who will go and felicitate such lynching accused people. They will pay for their legal defense. They will go and visit their homes and offer their support to them. So that shows that this informal violence outside the state is in many ways connected to the state. So it is pretty much a very classical case of state repression. It's not simply private repression of vegetarianism or of meat eating. So let us start towards the conclusion here, and let me also share that in this entire research, we have been asking ourselves why Brahmanism is so much focused on food alone. And then we figured out that this happens because food is such an ordinary and everyday thing, which you do like every day, you repeat it every day, and it is so mundane that people tend to think the least about it. They don't think about it. They just follow the rule. And a very close example that we found to this was actually toilets in public spaces. So if you are outside of your house and if you want to go to a toilet, you will always make sure that you are going to the right toilet, right? So you basically sort your gender automatically without anyone telling you to go into a particular toilet. Food is pretty much like that. You have been, I mean, socialized and conditioned so much that you automatically know what is good food and what is bad food. And that is why Brahmanism uses food. It's a great strategy. I mean, it's a bad strategy, but it's a great strategy of inducting people into the caste system. So when we basically, I just quickly want to summarize and then open up for questions and answers and comments. Definitely, I mean, yes, people can ask directly. I think Jaspreet will let us have that here. So our regression models basically show that vegetarian households are highly likely to discriminate on the basis of caste identity and are heavily invested in Brahmanism. And we also demonstrate through other evidence, interviews, as well as other materials, that vegetarianism is not a simple product of socialization or a preference that people choose freely from several options. It is a very carefully orchestrated practice that is imposed upon individuals by force through multiple arenas and mechanisms. Uh, and these mechanisms use a combination of ideology and repression, right? So people don't learn vegetarianism, they are made to learn vegetarianism, and through it, Brahmanism. And finally, I mean, we argue in our paper also that glorifying Indian vegetarianism without discussing or understanding its politics is nothing but supporting its regressive nature, and it enables vegetarianism to reproduce the unequal caste order that represses the majority of India's population. Thank you so much, and we'll be happy to talk more about this.
Thank you so much. This was a fascinating discussion. I'll try to quickly highlight some of the points that I grabbed during the discussion, and because I have the mic, I'll take the privilege of asking the first question and then open it for folks. Another thing that I would request everybody on the meeting to do is please write your questions in the chat box, either on Zoom or on YouTube, and then we'll take those questions and ask. We are requesting this of all the participants because in past we have had some issues with Zoom bombing, and we do not want to do that this time, and we would really prefer and love for you to ask questions, but we don't want to open the mics for everyone to speak.
I think we are very, very happy that we are on Zoom, and we will not be lynched at least. I mean, we will only be bombed, Zoom bombed.
Yes, but we'll try to minimize that as well. So I think one of the big and fascinating points that I kind of like was what you guys mentioned in the start off was like Indian vegetarianism is not religious or simply about health. It's political. So that is something which is not talked about. That is something which is always seen as we are religious, that's why we are practicing this this particular choice of food. So it's more than just choice or preference of food. It is a political statement. It is what you are showing in which camp you are basically. And and another thing, I think Abhilasha, you said that they can folks who are exercising this kind of choice or preference or religious statement or political statement, they can kill humans to protect animals, which itself is such a heavy statement to think about, that are you trying to say that the life of these human beings whom you're lynching is worse than the animals? So we have to think about those and thinking about humanizing the folks who are being like Muslims and that community who's been like attacked and lynched for their choice of food. So we have to think about humanizing and rehumanizing that aspect. So we have to think about that. And then the other, another important and very interesting I felt during the discussion was graphs. So those were amazing. They looked great. And like just this whole dialogue about are vegetarian households actually casteist? So like that was such an interesting point that we came to in the conversation. And of course, the whole like characterization of demons or rakshasas or janas, which is come across with meat eaters, and the gender part about the tamasic food, I think that was fascinating as well. Like I've heard, like this is such a relatable topic because everybody has heard about this. This is something we see. This is something we probably haven't been able to like theorize it that well, like in that way, but this was really fascinating. So I think I'll get to my question now. So I was thinking about, it's a two-part thing. One, like, so what arguments can we use to fight against this rhetoric of vegetarianism is pure or vegetarianism is Indian? Like what arguments can we use with folks who are here in the US, who grow up here, with kids, who are around us, with folks who are turning vegetarian because they feel that Indians are pure and they're vegetarians. So what arguments can we use for those kind of like conversations? And then the other part is just my own curiosity. Did you guys get any pushback while publishing this paper? So those my two parts.
So answer the last question. So we are still trying to publish that paper, so we will know.
We've had one rejection, so we are going to send it again. I think as soon as we finish this talk, in the next 2 days, we'll be sending this again, and we'll see. We know that caste-based analysis are very difficult to publish. Abhilasha has had a recent experience with another paper of another type, which has been rejected primarily because one of the reviewers said that this person who wrote this paper, her, has no idea of what caste is in India. So I mean, you can see that kind of pushback coming from. So yes, we will see pushbacks, but that does not mean that this will not get published. I think, Brandeis University just came out with a journal on caste. So I think we are now having all these, forums where we can go if we see pushbacks. So the thing will go out for sure. We are not sure where exactly. But the first question, I think that is very complicated. So, for example, I was born in a Muslim family. I ate meat from my beginning, from my childhood. I like eating meat. I enjoy it. But living in the US and looking at the brutal meat industry, and looking at how animals are treated in a philosophical way, that one species eating another species is now starting to even hurt me. And I constantly talk about, turning vegetarian. And Abhilasha jokes with me that you will never turn vegetarian. This is just a talk. But someone turning vegetarian can happen without looking up to India. So that is the argument here. India does not have any monopoly over vegetarianism. Vegetarianism has been a very old idea. India is no pioneer in vegetarianism. It's just these 4.5% Brahmins and 0.00 some percent Jains in India who are vegetarian. Sikhs also are primarily vegetarian, but these are very minuscule groups. So one, if someone wants to become vegetarian, the reason is important. What is the context? So if someone says, I want to become vegetarian because it helps climate change, good, do that. You should become it. But India is not your role model. India should not be your role model because Indian vegetarianism is brutal, is violent, is discriminatory, and is completely political. It is ideological. So that is a short answer to your question.
Yeah, and we can, start populating these ideas with people,
right,
especially from here who think of, India and its association with vegetarianism as something pure, which is coming from the similar discourse of Brahmanism, which has been, propagated.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great starter to conversation. So we have another question coming in. Is it so Swaroop says, is it true that Brahmins were pioneers of beef eating in ancient times when animal sacrifice was everyday rituals like Buddha period? Later they took the U-turn over the period. And I've heard this also from Baba Saheb's like counter revolution and counter revolution texts. So do you guys want to like comment about that?
This our paper, this particular paper doesn't focus on this, but a very eminent, a very well-respected historian who also happens to be a Brahmin, D.N. Jha, has a great book about cow eating and beef eating in India. So Swaroop, you should read that book. And I would not say Brahmins were pioneers. I mean, Brahmins were pioneers in nothing. They were they came here from outside. So whatever was happening here was pioneered by other people. And cows have been around before humans. When humans came and when humans decided to eat meat, they I think ate all kinds of meat. So they must have eaten meat or cows and buffaloes and everything even before Brahmins came to India. So they are not pioneers, but it is true that Brahmins have a long history of beef eating. And yes, Sarvendra says that the myth of the holy cow, that is the name of the book, I think, D.N. Jha's book. So yes, they ate meat till very recently. And don't let them fool you by saying that Brahmins have never eaten beef or meat or whatever.
And Dr. Ambedkar makes the same argument when he describes that hierarchy, right? So
yeah,
you can look at it.
Right.
Yeah. And so the next question is by Sarvendra. So he asks, just curious to know what is the source of the data about caste composition shown in one of the slides?
So what we have done, I think, is we have used the data set.
Yeah. So the data for population percentages is coming from the census data, and the data. No, I think both the data is coming from our IHDS data set.
Right.
What we have assumed here is that the IHDS is a nationally representative data set, and it is the second wave. It's a pretty well-established data set, and so we are basically assuming that their distribution of caste across households represents the actual the population distribution. Sarvendra, does that sound like right? We know that the caste census is a big controversy, and the government doesn't really want it to come out. It eventually should, but we have been dependent on the IHTS distribution of caste.
Yeah, data disaggregation also, or aggregation of data, is also like such a complex topic in India, because if you do to get it out, then there would be conversations about it, and that's what the communities like don't want to do. So right. I think that's complex too. So right. We have okay, I'll go to Sarvin's comment, which says, as per my knowledge, last caste census was in 1931. So this this is IHDS data that
IHDS.
It's a University of Maryland data, and they have come up with 2 waves of this data. It's a household, household and individual level survey.
Okay, wonderful. So that might be that might suffice what you were trying to find the source for. We have Deepa.
I just want to add some, if you allow me.
Sure.
Yeah. Thank you, Aseem, for such a wonderful lecture. And the way you have operationalized the Althusser's idea of ideological status separators is really wonderful to listen it, actually. And most of the time, whatever the caste studies are done on India, actually, the problem comes from this only this graph, actually. The graph you have shown that 4.5% is composition of the Brahmins, actually. So 1931, last time when the Britishers took that thing, they very categorically mentioned that what is the caste composition. And the last time, again in 2011, and that caste census is already done, but it's not coming out. The government is intentionally not taking out that data. So one thing. And the second thing is that in recent past, we have seen that the way the idea of vegetarianism has been institutionalized in the state academic institutions, this is very interesting to study. And have you tried to address that question? How what are the different mechanism and what are the different processes through which this vegetarianism is getting institutionalized in different uh, academic institutions?
Not far. So, I mean, there is a lot of work happening, and I off the cuff remember two works, one by Gaurav Pathania, and who has been on Boston Study Group recently, and one by a person in Europe called Sita Mala. And they have basically written about food fascism in educational institutions and how it gets institutionalized. So some work is happening, but I'm pretty sure that there is a lot of work that can happen. And I'll be happy to collaborate. Both of us will be happy to collaborate on this focus. If you propose something, we can have another small project that focuses just on that. In our paper, this is one of the many ways in which vegetarianism becomes practice, right? So we have not focused too much on it, but I know that people are working on it and there is still more need to work on it, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarvendra, for asking the questions. I'm sure you can understand like our hesitations in opening up the question platform for everyone to ask, but we really appreciate that you asking the question. And so the next one for both of you comes from Deepa. She asked, Tamasic and Sattvic categories are also categorized based on caste, or is it a scientific proven category?
What do you think?
I think they come from scriptures rather than anything else. And of course, they are. So what we are saying is that they are the categories that are used by caste groups to identify or, make hierarchies of food. Right? That's what we are trying to say. And I don't think that there is a scientific basis to it. They are essentially coming from scriptures. That's what's I think.
I think there is another nuanced way of thinking about them. So Sattvic and Tamasic, the way they are described, they also sort of project or depict whether a particular kind of food is endothermic or exothermic. I mean, I studied physics, and so I'm using that analogy. So a lot of Tamasic foods are supposed to be exothermic, and to use terms, they create heat in your body. Now this heat can come from foods like green chilies. If you eat green chilies, it is actually exothermic. It increases the metabolic rate in your body. So I think there is some science that can be found to understand the division between Sattvic and Tamasic foods. However, as social scientists, what we are interested in is whether this science or no science explanation is being used to put down people. So the whole idea of Tamasic and Sattvic food is problematic to us, not because of the science, but because it puts down one, women, two, it puts down people who are supposed to belong to the so-called lower castes. So I mean, that is the more political or sociological problem that we are interested in. There may be science behind endothermic foods and exothermic foods. I mean, all Unani medicine and Ayurveda have all these, notions, thanda food, garam food. So I don't really want to go there. I don't know about it. Even if it is true, we problematize its use to put down people as inferior. So that is what we focus on.
Right, exactly. So food then somehow becomes more important than people. That's what we are trying to say, right? The food cannot be, food is consumed by people for survival, right? So that's how we start eating food, because we want to survive. So people are the primary focus of, and not only social scientific studies, but generally that's
and
right.
I just wanted to share a quick thing, because I see Venkat also listening to this. He's muted though. I just ate some very highly exothermic, what was the gongura goat curry last week, and it was so exothermic that I actually sweated it out. So it was really, really exothermic.
Yes, we know what you're talking about. We have another question from Damu ESK on YouTube, and the person asks, And first they say, thanks to Boston Study Group for organizing these kind of discussions. How are we going to oppose the current government as legally saying that our food is our right? And can you explain a little bit more about Article 48?
I don't think I have or either of us have a very good answer to this. I mean, this is more of a separate debate, very related to this, but a different kind of a debate. And I mean, some people have started using these restrictions on food as food fascism. I think that is a very good way of, framing these rules, regulations, and these social norms around food. So I think we should start using that term, food fascism, more often. We should politicize this whole thing. And I think one way in which we can sort of resist this fascism is to constantly dig out the caste basis or the Brahmanist basis of all these food restrictions. So when people like to, make you believe that this is their preference, this is their choice, they are basically not interested in killing animals. And we don't kill animals like Muslims do on Bakrid. It is Bakrid, so you see a lot of memes around it. But we really have to, remind these proponents of vegetarian food that actually Indian vegetarians are such heavy users of milk products. They are equally or even more brutal than people who eat meat, because the industrial production of milk and milk products is dependent on keeping an animal alive in a very, very brutal situation. The animal is made to artificially mimic pregnancy over and over again, and hormones are injected, milk is brought out. So that is also equally or more brutal than actually killing animals to eat. So we can use all these things. I'm not so sure how to respond to the resistance to the government here. We are talking about a fascist movement.
Yeah.
And any way that can be used to resist fascism can also be or should also be used here.
Yeah.
But we also kind of brought out, how this socialization primarily happens within your family. So realizing that and actually countering your own family is what is going to break the stronghold of Brahmanism, right? Because it is an everyday act which happens within your family. So it needs a lot of sociological imagination apart from dealing with the repressive status, which might be out there and easier to think about, but more difficult to think about is these personal relations, food relations. How do you think about that? And that is more difficult and challenging, and we don't have easy answers.
Yeah, I think conversations like these kind of like open up a space to talk about this, because this is probably the first time that such discussions are coming on the table. Like, people have written about it, but having discussions and talking to folks who are joining from all different sections of the society also makes a big difference in dispersing that knowledge, right?
Right.
We have, I think Sanjay sir wanted to ask a question. Sanjay sir, you can go ahead and ask question.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. Jai Bhim, Abhilasha ji and Aseem ji, thanks for coming to Boston Study Group Ambedkar Lecture Series. Very fascinating discussions. And in fact, when you were showing those charts, means correlating all the social evils which is going on since centuries in India, correlated to this concept of vegetarian and non-vegetarian is really awesome. And when I was listening to this, I thought that it should reach out to more and more people. And I was thinking that you should go on speaking about these intellectual discussions going on in this particular session. So thank you very much for doing it. So I have a question, means whether the subject, this Brahmanism and vegetarian food preferences India, would have been more apt if it is a casteism and vegetarian food preferences India, or you still wanted to highlight it is more of an issue of the Brahmanism rather than the casteism?
We have been struggling with the connections between Brahmanism and caste system. So we have been reading a lot about this. We are trying to, funnel down to a more tighter understanding. But what we understand as of now, that it is very difficult to disentangle Brahmanism from the caste system. Brahmanism is, I mean, in my at least view, if not yours, in my view, Brahmanism is more like a worldview. It's a general ontology of how things should be organized in the world, right? And the caste system is a structure that upholds that worldview. So if Brahmanism is the kind of sky, the caste system is kind of the earth on which this sky is imposed. So they're not very easy to disentangle. They're very related. I'm not sure how you think about this.
No, so I agree, but also, so there is this material and ideological. So we were focusing on the ideological. That is why we are trying to use Brahmanism, because that is more, so the caste system is more a material organization on which Brahmanism provides the ideological sky, as Aseem is saying. Those two cannot be disconnected. And I think that was what we were trying to do when we thought about Althusser's ideology, right? How capitalist systems are reproduced, right? Through people, but also through ideology, which makes one sort of people, rule other people, right? Extract their labor. So similarly, caste system has a material basis that Dr. Ambedkar talked about, as well as the ideological basis, right? And those two are so intertwined with each other that we cannot disengage.
But are we understanding your question correctly?
Yeah,
Sanjay
maybe,
ji?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is what I wanted to convince. Means my the reason for asking this question is, and what I got from your lecture is basically this is the teaching of the Brahmanism, which is contributing to this particular type of the behavior.
Right.
But when practically we see that means the other oppressing classes or caste also behave the same way, means they are also propagate the same casteism and all these. And at the same time, I'm not sure whether they follow the vegetarian or non-vegetarian path, but whether that particular correlation exists between this type of food somebody eats and the type of the casteism they follow. So that's what's my concern.
Right.
Yeah, I get you. So Sanjay is saying basically, is Brahmanism only followed by Brahmins?
Okay.
So can you
I mean, so that is interesting, because I mean, so what we understand is, and what we use is that Brahmanism is an ideology that can be followed by anyone. I mean, for example, I mean, a Dalit person or a Buddhist person or a Muslim person can be Brahmanist. And Muslims, especially, I mean, among Muslims, you will see Brahmanism. I mean, we use Brahmanism to mean this overall understanding that people are organized in a hierarchy. There are some at the top, some in the middle, some in the bottom. That particular scheme is Brahmanism to us. So anyone can be a Brahmanist. I mean, so people who become vegetarians or who revere the Brahmin, even if they are OBC or Dalit or Muslim, are Brahmanists. I mean, within Muslims, the comparable group to Brahmins is the Sayyids. So if supposedly lower caste Muslim believes that Sayyids are respectable, Sayyids are superior than him, he is also a Brahmanist. I mean, so in that sense, anyone can be a Brahmanist as long as they agree with the hierarchical nature of society. If you oppose it, you are not a Brahmanist, right? So a Brahmin can be a Brahmanist, a OBC can be a Brahmanist, a Dalit can be a Brahmanist, and there can be Brahmins who are not Brahmanists. We also know, so for example, D.N. Jha. I mean, D.N. Jha or R.S. Sharma, their entire work in history about ancient Indian history is anti-Brahmanist. So they are, it's very difficult to argue that they're also Brahmanists. They are not. Or at least they're mostly not, because I mean, sometimes caste is so deep within that sometimes it pops out, right? In moments of crisis. Right. So a Brahmin can be an anti-Brahmanist, and a Dalit can be a Brahmanist. So that is the way in which you understand this.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This is an explanation I was looking for. Thanks, Serge.
And then we have another one from Gunjan. And she says that, or they say that we have seen the beliefs are so deeply ingrained about vegetarianism that even the people who support being omnivore are most of the times in guilt. So food is something that we consume based on our choices, but now our choices are also driven by the trends in social media. If a person wants to support idea of food choices, not the old ideologies around, at least around me, can you suggest ways to start this conversation?
Go ahead. So I think Gunjan also sort of resonates with one of the things that we said, that vegetarianism is such a strong ideology that it also affects people who eat meat. Even they are vegetarianists in their mind because they think they're doing something wrong, right? They're doing a sin. They should ideally not do it. So how do we counter this? The question is, how do we counter it? I mean, I think asking questions and sort of, coming out of your comfort zone is sort of the way in how this should be done. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this because, I mean, I'm so deeply rooted outside of following norms in my general life that I'm not able to really relate with this very much. But I mean, other people here might have some ideas. I mean, more maybe younger people might have better ideas than I have. Abhilasha, do you want to add something to this?
Yeah, so I think that norms, can be countered in two ways, either by rebelling against them, all at once, or by constantly engaging in a dialogue and hoping that it will change. So both of those ways can personally, that goes to personally. So this paper is not about personal experience, rather about the mechanisms, but personally both of these ways can be tried, right? You argue with your parents, like people here in the West, for example, they do argue with their parents. When they become vegan and vegetarians, they have to talk to their parents, right? And tell them in no uncertain terms that they are going to not eat meat. And it doesn't go well with many families. It's not that it is easy for them. It's sometimes when you are younger and living with your parents, it can be quite difficult.
And even when you have grown up and you live away from your parents in the West, when you go back for Christmas or Thanksgiving, oftentimes you will become a butt of joke because, I mean, everyone is eating turkey or, meat, and you are the only odd one out and they have to prepare something for you. I mean, but I think one thing which I think now as Abhilasha was speaking was that back in India, I mean, we have a very strange, not a strange, a very understandable family system where we continue to treat even grown-up people as children, right? So Gunjan, who's asking this question, or others in their late 20s or early 30s, are considered children by their parents. And the kids also consider themselves as children who should ask for approval all the time. So asking for approval is, again, a very, very caste-based training that we have received. And breaking out of it really requires a lot of agency. Like one quick way that I would favor is to stop asking for advice. Stop asking for approval. Do your own thing, right? I mean, if you are lucky enough to have a job and financial independence of your own, I mean, you're pretty much free, right? You can do things. You need not tell, share, approve, get approval for everything. So, I mean, that is maybe a more straightforward way of going about it. I'm not sure if Gunjan will agree or not, but yeah.
I think Venkata, if you want to ask.
No, I don't have any question. Thank you for a wonderful talk, and so that's all I want to. I don't have any questions.
Sure. I saw you unmute yourself. That's why I wanted to.
No. I just wanted to say, yeah.
Okay. We have another one from Ajay, and this. The minority people, Brahmins, are deciding the appetite of the majority Dalits and OBCs even today after 72 years of India's independence. What is your opinion about this? How can we find a solution for this?
I mean, in democracies, elections are important. We know that. In democracies, freedom of speech is important. In democracies, saying your thing is important. So I think we should do all of those things. But the current government has mastered how to neutralize all these three things, how to neutralize the power of democratic elections, how to neutralize free speech, how to neutralize resistance. So we are in a very strange kind of a place. I'm sure that if we were having this talk back in India, it would have been very difficult to have this relaxed discussion. So we have really come down to that. So I'm a little pessimistic about this. I don't really know what to offer to you as a solution, but hopefully we will come out of this gutter and sort of reclaim our independence to say what we want, to eat what we want, to not eat what we don't want, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, we can keep the conversation going and thinking about ways of resisting. That's what we can think at this point.
Yes, thank you. And I think which one? I can't. The one Damu. So there's one more which is more like something we've talked about. This is on YouTube that came up. Some vegetarian people used to say that whosoever eating beef has some bad smell from their body. Is that true, or is that something you came across?
I mean, so these type of stereotypes exist about all types of people across the world. In the US, in Europe, some people believe or think that people of color have a strange smell coming from their body. They perspire more, or they do this, or they do that. If you eat this, you will smell like this. I mean, I think this is all imaginary ways of casting meat eating as an inferior thing. There cannot be, a scientific basis to this. You may like or dislike a smell based on how you have been socialized.
Yeah.
So we were watching this movie, Akuni, the Axone on Netflix, which has this fermented soybean dish that these girls from the Northeast are trying to cook in their rented house in Delhi.
Yeah,
and how everyone, gets scandalized by the smell. And I see myself, I have been eating meat and I have been very adventurous about what to eat. And I eat a bunch of things, bunch of animals, bunch of insects. And yet, sometimes I find something very disagreeable because, I have never done it, right? So it's a new thing. I have not been cultured into it. I have not been trained to like that smell. Similarly, anyone can find particular meat, a food item, bad smelling based on culture. So everything about culture and about smell and sight is cultural. If you are trained into it, you will like it. Or caste. If your caste, culture, training helps you appreciate it, you will. If your caste, cultural training helps you abhor it, you will abhor it. So it's basically training and nothing else. Just to make a quick example, I eat meat, and I thought I would also like seafood, but I was cooking some crab and some lobster, and when you open them up, all the orange mushy stuff, I can't handle it. I find it very disagreeable. I can't eat it. So it's because I'm not trained to eat that, right? So I'm learning to eat it. I may learn, but I don't like it as of now. So it's very cultural.
Mm-hmm. Venkata, you have a comment to make? Yeah, we can unmute you.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Jesse, and thank you both. See, I have a comment to make. How as in India, what true India is misrepresented in rest of the world, or in the where most of these elite, I hate the upper caste word, dominant caste people are the face of India, right? They are the ones who got educated. They are the ones go and present it. They are the ones write the books. They are the ones travel abroad, or even if somebody a foreigner comes, the likelihood of them interacting is 90% of the time probably they come from dominant caste. So they get especially in the West, very, very distorted view of India. So I'll tell you my experience. I went to Switzerland about 2 years back, and then to meet one of our customers. Then they wanted to order lunch, and by default they assume all Indians are vegetarian. So he asked, okay, so you like some vegetarian food? He says, no, I eat meat. So then, okay, he said, okay, probably I'm, for the first time I'm meeting some Indian eating meat, he said. Yeah, okay, that I'm not surprised with that, but the truth of the matter is majority of Indians eat meat. Then he was shocked to know that fact. I said, majority, and it's increasing. Okay, it's increasing. Like, for example, I do not know this, but most of the Banya people in Telugu states, they openly eat now. When I was growing up, they used to little bit, it's a stigma, so they used to hide and all that, but they used to come when we invite them for parties to our houses. They used to love to my friends. Okay, but now they're open, they're cooking and all that. A lot of Banya from Telugu states, at least I can. Then
Exactly.
so I told him, one important thing I told him, yes. So the majority Indians eat, but the majority of people you meet don't eat meat.
Good point. Good
And
point.
the potential of you meeting, the really lower strata of people is very minimal. And especially people like us, we are coming from, trenches all the way to up, and we are now speaking out. So you would know this is just early stage. So please, next time you ask, you put it in the context, okay? Anybody, how majority of the people live is very different. And in fact, most of the, lower strata of society have a very, very egalitarian, very, how do you call, a lot of things you can relate to Western world. I'm not saying it's a good or bad, but it's much more egalitarian, much more democratic, much more equality, even with the women and men, they both work together, both do things together in the lower strata. So yeah, he was said, oh, for the first time I'm learning this about India. Never, ever anybody spoke. Then I said, yeah, you should, next time you meet anybody, ask about caste. They will say, no, that nothing exists. You make it a point to ask about it, and it exists everywhere. But this is the problem. Who are representing India, who are ruling India, who are controlling India, is a tiny minority that actually cannot represent India, cannot relate to the larger population. So it's just a comment and personal experience.
No, thank you so much. This is important, right?
And I think, if you permit, I'll quickly add something.
Please.
Venkat Garu's book. So, I mean, Venkat's pain at this question is also needs to be contextualized by the fact that Telangana is the most meat-eating region in India. 98% of
really?
Telangana eat meat.
But I'm not surprised. Do you know the fact? Sorry to interrupt you. Telangana state, I mean, our chief minister has done a census. So there are no caste census, right? I mean, after 1936, there are no caste census. But Telangana government has done a survey, and this fellow, that government is not publishing outside, okay? I mean, he has done like 4 or 5 years back. They did a caste survey, but he's holding it. But according to some of the leaks and all that, even he claimed during the agitation, the present chief minister claimed it's a 93% of Telangana is SC, ST, OBC minorities. 93%. So that's why it is not surprising what you said. So sorry to interrupt, but you go ahead.
Sure. I mean, so the point is that coming from there, you will, if someone assumes and does not offers you only vegetarian, you are going to be very, very angry. 98% meat eating.
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah.
Highest in India. And I think the context, the political and historical context of that is very important. So I mean, if you think about Telangana has been ruled by the Nizams for a very long time. And because of the Nizam,
before that, Kuli Qutb Shah, so there were like 600 years of Islamic rule,
And because of the court system of the Nizams, all the dominant castes were actually very much integrated into the Nizam's foodways. So Kapus and Reddis and Kammas and everyone, all the dominant groups are meat eating.
You're right.
I'm saying that as a theoretical point because Natarajan and Jacob, I mean, in their paper in 2018, they make a very good point. They say that the incidence of vegetarianism in a particular state depends on how the dominant caste there operates. So the dominant caste in Telangana is Reddy, Raju, Kapu, and they are non-vegetarian. Similarly, in Kerala, dominant caste are non-vegetarian or omnitarian. In Madhya Pradesh, the dominant caste is Brahmin, even though they are 3%. So, they lead, the elites lead the foodways. In Rajasthan, the Jats are very dominant and they are vegetarian. In Haryana, the Jats are vegetarian, they are dominant. So the dominant caste in every state leads the food way, and other people are forced to follow it. So I mean, that's the theoretical point that Jacobs and Natarajan make, which works here also.
Just you permit me to follow up one comment. Sorry, is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Sorry, I don't want. I'm surprised to know that Jats are vegetarian in Rajasthan. Wow, I didn't know that. Okay, but I'll tell you, your observation is so correct because of influence. See, we have a landholding communities, especially Telangana. There are Reddis and Velamas. Actually, we don't have Kammas, Reddis and Velamas. Then Brahmins. We have a landholding Brahmin landlords like P.V. Narasimha Rao comes from a landholding, and they have a slightly, we call and of course this caste system has all these variations of Brahmins also. The landholding Brahmins, they're called Karanal, okay? But they're Brahmins, it's like P.V. Narasimha Rao. And most of them also eat meat.
Right.
Landholding Brahmins, yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm shedding my mouth, Jesse.
You're fine.
No, thank you.
No worry. So I just wanted to say, like, what just following up on that, what you said, like power equals food, and then food equals caste in India. I think that's like a summary. And this came up. I had thought about this before and I forgot to kind of mention it. Annihilation of Caste essay by Dr. Ambedkar, he talks about, how to annihilate caste. And two of the things that he mentions specifically in that is interdining and intermarriage.
So, exactly.
You see, yeah. So I think in our conversation today, both of those things came up where we know like endogamy is and controlling of women's sexuality. That is also related to tamasic food rhetoric, and in the same way interdining, because like these pure veg, or I have even seen pure Vaishno dhabas or restaurants, what they try to do is like segregation of dining. So I think all of that boils down to trying to maintain and reproduce caste, and the things which can actually annihilate caste, that is like interdining and intermarriage, those are being like diffused. So I think that's like kind of thing if we think of the conversation where it went. So this was fascinating. If you both have like some final points, things to say, that'll be great, and then we will be able to close the session.
I just want to complicate this whole thing because I mean I'm myself very conflicted right now around food, and so I grew up omnitarian. I love eating meat, but as I'm actually working on a book manuscript right now on climate change, and and writing about climate change, I read a lot about the industrial meat industry, and that made me very uncomfortable about eating meat. Now I'm approaching this possibility of vegetarianism from a very different perspective. And I think there is a small number of people across the world who are now going to become vegetarians because of climate change, because they do not truly want to be in a position where one species eats another species, right? And I think that is going to complicate our general discussion. So I just want to say that everyone who is listening to this should take our argument in its proper context. We oppose vegetarianism as ideology. We oppose vegetarianism as caste politics. We oppose vegetarianism as Brahmanism. We do not oppose the act of vegetarianism, the act of becoming a vegetarian. That is something which should be ideally free of politics, right? People should be free to choose whatever they wish.
Yes, and that's a beautiful way to put it. Abhilasha?
Yeah, that's no, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I think this is amazing. That's a beautiful way to put it. We don't oppose the act of being a vegetarian, and quote unquote, I'm also a vegetarian, so I'm right there with you. But we don't oppose the act of being a vegetarian. What we oppose is vegetarianism as a political strategy or tool.
Right.
Thank you, both of you. This is amazing. Thank you for joining, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Jai Bhim, everyone.
Bye-bye, Jai Bhim.
Yeah, thank you.